And I could even say a good Yontif, as today is Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and it is anniversary of the date when the Rebbe recovered from his heart attack in 1978. So it's a day of great blessing for all our people, for all good. And I wanted to share with you a few stories in connection to the Kinas HaShluchim. Tonight is also the conference, the international conference for Chabad rabbis in New York. And it's not just for Chabad rabbis, but as the Rebbe said when he became the leader of Chabad, that our generation is the seventh from the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu was the seventh from Abraham, and it was Moshe Rabbeinu, it was Moses who brought the divine presence to the world, so too it is the mission of our generation to bring the divine presence to the world, to be manifest in the third temple and forever. And so the mission that therefore of the various thousands of shluchim, emissaries the Rebbe has around the world, which the truth is, as the Rebbe said so many times, that every single Jew is an emissary of God to spread Torah and Judaism and goodness and kindness around them. This mission is something that brings Mashiach and makes it happen. So I wanted to share with you a few stories about the unique power of this mission and the unique power of the one who is sending us on this mission. But first, I want to share with you a story of someone who shared the namesake of the rabbi who passed away last week, Achon al-Itzlan. There was a Jew whose name was Rav Gariel Kogan. It says that after Shabbos, there is a custom to sing a song, "Do not be afraid, my servant Yaakov. Do not be afraid, my servant." After you've gone through Shabbos, and now you have to go back to the week, you might be frightened. It's many of the custom to sing a song, "Al tira avdi Yaakov. Do not be afraid, my servant Yaakov." And in that spirit, I want to share with you a story of the Rebbe Rashab about not being afraid. There was a Jew named Rabbi Gariel Kogan, and Rabbi Gariel Kogan was visiting the rabbi of Chernikov, Rabbi David Tzvi. Rabbi David Tzvi asked Rabbi Gariel Kogan, maybe you could share with us a story about the Gentiles and the Rebbe's promise. This is what he shared. Rabbi Gariel lived in a village called Melaveh. This was in the time of Rebbe Rashab in the late 1800s. I'm sorry, in the early 1900s. And he lived near the city of Nyezhin in Dormilovka. If you can pronounce that well, you may lose your American passport. Anyways, this gentleman, Rabbi Gariel Kogan, he managed to make a good living from his business. His business was, he had this little store. He had an argument with some of his Gentile neighbors. And they were so angry at him that they threatened to kill him. And he was so afraid that he didn't sleep at home. He didn't know what to do. And so he was walking around the next day and he heard people in the marketplace that he's a marked man, that they're going to kill him. So he was terrified. And so for the next couple of days, he kept on moving, sleeping in different location every night. And he was so desperate, he decided he's going to go travel to the city of Lubavitch to speak to the Rebbe. When he got there, he realized that he wasn't going to be able to speak to the Rebbe because there were a lot of guests that were visiting the Rebbe Rashab at the time, and therefore he wouldn't be given a turn. And the Misharis, the Rebbe's secretary, Reb Nachman, he said, you can't come in. There are many people who have a turn before you, and you have to wait for a couple of days. So he said, I didn't really know anybody in the town, and I didn't know anyone in the city of Lubavitch, but all of a sudden I met a friend of mine. There was someone I knew, who was Reb Nachum Mendel Chaim, who was the rabbi of the city of Nyezhin. So I ran over to him, I told him what's going on, and I told him that Reb Nachum was not letting me in. So Reb Nachman is doing his job, and he's the Rebbe's secretary, and there's an order, there's a line, but I have a really serious situation, life and death. I need to go right away. So Reb Nachman Mendel says, don't worry, hold on. He disappears, and he goes into another room. He realized afterwards that Reb Nachman Mendel Chaim had gone into the room of the Rebbe's wife, Rebbe's Neshana Sarah, and she must have told the Rebbe Rasha what's going on. And so all of a sudden, Reb Nachman announces a minute later, where is the Jew from Dor Milovke? And in a moment, he was ushered into the Rebbe's room. After he blurts out his story to the Rebbe gave him a blessing that no harm will befall you. He wasn't satisfied because he was scared. He says, Rebbe, I'm afraid to go home. I want you to promise me that nothing bad will happen to me. So Rebbe Rashab smiled, and Rebbe Rashab said, what do you want me to do? You want me to make all the Gentiles of your town to die? Like, what do you want? So Rav Nachman, the Rebbe's secretary, was doing his best to evict this visitor from the room, trying to encourage him to leave while they were speaking to him. So he wasn't just encouraging him, he was actually pulling his arm. So he wasn't ready to go, though. He says, Rebbe, promise me. I'm afraid to go back home. So Rebbe Rashab said, and if I promise you, will you be afraid? And he says, no, Rebbe, I won't be afraid. No. So in that case, said the Rebbe Rashab, I promise that you will not be bothered by these Gentiles. The minute he heard the Rebbe's promise, such a clear and unambiguous terms, he felt he calmed down, and when he got home, he learned that one of his enemies was riding a horse and was drunk while he was riding his horse next to a riverbanks and fell in the water and drowned. A second person got killed in another accident. Four others had been involved in a plot to set fire to the Paritz's estate, and they were arrested by the police and given 8 years in prison in Siberia. The Rebbe's promise was fulfilled, but he said 8 years later, when they four guys came out, he was still like, what these guys going to do after they came out of prison? But when they came back, they didn't bother him. On the contrary, he said they became good merchants. They good customers in his store. This is the promise Hashem tells us after Shabbos, Al Tirav Yaakov, don't be afraid. That's a story of this chassid, Rabbi Kogan. And this is something that is relevant to each of us, whatever our mission is, not to be afraid, to know who's going with you. I heard the story many years ago, over 20 years ago, when I was studying in New York, and I just most recently met someone, one of the Baba Chassidim, who ratified the details of the story. So I wanted to share it. I may have shared it before. I don't remember. He said like this, that I was visiting this shul in the Lower East Side, and the rabbi of the shul was a Baba Chassid. And he told me the following story. So the Baba Rebbe had a custom that Reb Shlomo Halberstam had a custom that on Purim he would go do what's called rimplin. Rimplin means that he would go to one of his Chassidim and he would drink something, and the custom was they would break a vessel, and then he would leave. And one year, the Reb Shlomo Halberstam comes to one of his Chassidim, and he says everyone who has a child should say L'chaim. It's Purim, you should say L'chaim, and everyone has a child should say L'chaim for their children. So the host of this event didn't say L'chaim, and because he didn't have any children. And the Rebbe says to him, why don't you say L'chaim? He said, because I don't have any children. So he says, you don't have, but you will have. And then the Baba Rebbe, Hashem Halberstam, drank more than usually would drink. Usually he would make sure not to drink too much because he didn't want to get into a question of whether he should say an after blessing, but he drank more. And he said, now we have to say the bracha of Beri Nefashos, which literally means to create souls, meaning that there's going to be a blessing for a soul to be born. Another chassid of his also said, but Rebbe, I don't have any children. He says, you also have children. That's what happened um, to these two families. Baruch Hashem, one was blessed with a boy, one was blessed with a girl. 20 years later, Shema Halberstam returns to their home, and again he's doing Rimpelin, saying L'chaim, and they break a dish. It's a minhag from the Tzanzirov. And now the father of this 20-year-old girl tells the Baba Rebbe, now we need a blessing for her to find the shidduch, to find the soulmate. So he says, yes, maybe the Rebbe, he tells the Baba Rebbe, maybe now you can say the blessing of very nefashas Shabbos. Maybe you could drink more and say that blessing again. And the Baba Rebbe says, no, I can't do that. Now it's time to say the bracha of Al Amicha Al Kalkola. Al Amicha means thank you Hashem for your sustenance. And I guess that was a term he was using for the blessing of being to find the soulmate. And sure enough, this girl married the boy who was born by the blessing of Shema Halberstam on the same day that I put him before, who was also 20 years old. So the gentleman I was speaking to was the boy that was born from this blessing. And he said to me this, he's a rabbi in Lower East Side, and he said that he didn't really want to take on this position because he was a teacher, but this position came up. And he said that although it came up, he wasn't really sure if he should consider it or not consider it. And he went to visit Reb Shema Halberstam and asked him what he should think about, how he should view this offer. So he said that it was very unusual for the Baba Rebbe to give any of his Hasidim direct guidance as a command. It was more like, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that, hints, blessings, but never a command, never an instruction. He said it was also very unusual for the Baba Rebbe to mention any other Hasidic group. In Babav, they speak about Babav and no one else, no other Hasidic group. But he said, when I went to ask the Baba Rebbe if I should take this position, he mentioned the verse, he mentioned the interpretation of the verse, and he said, I should. And I said, he said, I have to. And that was a little bit off-putting. I said, but if I take on this position, I'll be losing something. Because now as a school teacher, I have time off during the summertime where I can study Torah. And if I take on the position as a rabbi in the synagogue, I won't have the time in the summertime to go in the Catskill Mountains, as many do, to spend time studying Torah the whole summer. So now Reb Shema Halberstam was visibly upset. And he slammed his hand on his glass table in a way that this rabbi told me he felt the glass table was going to break. He slams his hand and he says, in Lubavitch, the Rebbe give the slightest hint, and any one of his Hasidim, from the greatest of his Hasidim to the smallest of his Hasidim, is ready to go to the end of the world, the slightest hint. And I can't get one of my one young man to move 20 minutes, 30 minutes away from the center of Babav in Borough Park. I can't get one guy to move 20 minutes away. So because he was born from a blessing of the Baba Rebbe, and so was his wife, and their marriage was made through his blessing, he felt compelled that he had to take on this position. But he wanted to share with me that there's something unique that we take for granted in the Rebbe's instruction, Rebbe's blessing, and the reaction that we have today when we see that thousands and thousands of young men and women are completely dedicated to this mission in a way that we take for granted, but that itself is a miracle. The miracle is that they're ready to go with the slightest hint that this is something that would be a shlichus, be a mission that the Rebbe wants them to achieve. I'll share with you one more story in that regard. I heard the story from Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, Olav Shalom. Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, he was my Rosh Hashiva in Melbourne, Australia, and he was a very prominent rabbi in the Elwood Shul in Melbourne. He was a student of Telz, and very, very great Torah scholar and great chassid as well. So he said he once had a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wanted to know about his colleagues in the yeshiva of Telz what they felt about his interest in Lubavitch and his connection to the Rebbe. And he shared with the Rebbe that one of his colleagues expressed his distrust in this concept of shlichus, this concept of sending someone to a far-off city to build Judaism in that city, to bring Jews closer. And this colleague of his expressed it this way, that instead of having an impact and lifting the Jews in that particular environment to go to be higher, it's more likely is the man sent on this mission will descend. He'll be influenced, not influence. And he also shared with the Rebbe how the various complaints that people had about the Rebbe's mitzvah campaigns in general, that this whole idea that this was not a good idea. It's not a good idea to ask Jews to put on tefillin, to light Shabbos candles. It's just, the whole idea is, it's eroding the separation between the insular Torah world and the outside secular world in a way that's unhealthy, in a way that's not helpful. That's what he conveyed to the Rebbe. So in response, the Rebbe told him the following. The first temple, the Beis HaMikdash, the Talmud says, it had a unique revelation of godliness. The second temple was missing 5 things that the first temple had. And the revelation of godliness in the second temple pales in comparison to the revelation of godliness in the first temple. And yet, the kind of sins that were done in the time of the first temple were far more egregious, far worse in the sins of the second temple. What brought about the destruction of the second temple, the Talmud says in Gittin, the Talmud says that it was because of senseless hatred. People hated each other secretly in their hearts. That's what brought about the destruction of the temple. But the first temple, the Talmud says, was brought about because of more crimes, worse. There was murder, there was adultery, there was idolatry. And the Rebbe asked, why is it that the first temple had these terrible crimes when there was such a great revelation of godliness, and the second temple, which had a far less revelation, yet the crimes were more subtle? And in answer to this, the Rebbe said is that whenever there's a greater revelation of godliness, the opposite forces, opposite of holiness, contends with this revelation for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is because Hashem made the world in a way that it's fair. As we learned in today's Torah portion, there's Yaakov and there's Esau. And as Yaakov was blessed by his father, as Shem, when Rivka was pregnant with her 2 children, she went to Shem to find out what's going on with her children, what the meaning is of her twins. And he said to him, that each one will struggle against the other. So in a similar way, the Rebbe said that the forces of good are created in a way that the forces of evil contend with them. So to speak, to make it fair, to fulfill Hashem's purpose in creation, that the lowest realm should be a home for Hashem. So the world has to be the lowest realm. So therefore, there are forces of evil that are parallel to the forces of good. And therefore, in the time of the first temple, where there was more revelation of godliness, so there's also more of a struggle with it, because it's contending with this revelation. And a second reason the Rebbe said that was such an effort of evil, of Klippa, in the first temple, was because when Klippa, when evil, when the Yetzer Hara, when the evil inclination sees that it's going to be destroyed, it uses every dirty trick it can. It pulls everything out. It tries so hard because it sees it's like its last struggle. When it sees it's being obliterated, it tries its hardest so it shouldn't be obliterated. So therefore, in the first temple specifically, when there's more revelation, that's why there was more of a opposition. Another occasion, the Rebbe also compared this to the story in the Talmud about, I think it was Rabbi Shimon Chananya, that one of the Gentile philosophers who would ask him questions came to him when he was about to pass away, and he said to him, when you pass away, who can we pose our questions to? And he responded that when he passes away, they won't have such good questions. In other words, the only reason they have such questions, the only reason why they have this ability to contend with Judaism is because there's someone there who can defend it. Anyway, that's what Rebbe told Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, and he said the following: that the Mivtzoyim, the Mitzvah campaigns, the Tefillin campaign, the Shabbos campaign, like the kosher Jewish education, everyone should have a house full of Torah books. All the Rebbe's 10 Mitzvah campaigns bring such a revelation of godliness to the world that the forces of evil are trying their hardest to stop it. And therefore, what do? They even cause religious people who are officially very religious, so they should come out and go against these campaigns because the forces of evil, Klippa, feels like it's being destroyed. So therefore, it resorts to every kind of crazy trick it can, and and the evil inclination convinces religious people to not only to not engage in these campaigns, but to fight against them. But the Rebbe says the truth is the Torah tells us about the plague of frogs. Torah says that when God sent the frogs to attack the Egyptians in the second plague, the Torah says that after the plague was over, the frogs died. The frogs that were in the courtyard, the frogs that were in their homes, the frogs died. But the interesting distinction between where the frogs went and the Torah's description of their death is this. The Torah doesn't mention that the frogs that went into their ovens died. And the Rebbe said this is because, the Talmud says, the frogs that went in the ovens did not die. Why didn't they die? Because a frog is naturally a cold-blooded amphibian, and a fire is the opposite of where a frog would want to go. But because the frogs had sacrificed and they went into the ovens of Egypt, despite the sacrifice, because in that merit they were protected with miraculously by God. So in a similar way, the Rebbe said, when I send the shliach, when I send someone to cool off the ovens of Egypt, in other words, the ovens of Egypt represent the incredible attraction that exists in the world today to do the wrong thing. And the Rebbe's emissaries are meant to cool off the ovens and to offer people direction and to give them guidance and inspiration so they shouldn't get distracted by the ovens of Egypt, to cool off the ovens of Egypt. Just like, in other words, the frogs in Egypt were protected, so too the Rebbe said, when I send a shliach, it won't hurt him, not in this world and not in the next world. As Rebbe Rashab told this Rabbi Kogan, don't be afraid, I promise you will be okay. So this is not just a promise to be protected, but as we're going to read in this coming Torah portion, as we read today in Mincha, you will spread to the east and the west, the north and the south, without any limitations, until we see Ben Partzi, until we see the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach is called a child of Peretz, the son of Yehuda, Ben Partzi, who will break through all the boundaries of the exile and reveal the infinite light of Hashem in the world. We see this happen immediately, mamish. A good vach, a good chedesh, a freich und chedesh kislev. Good vach, David. Good vach, Yosef. Good vach, Herberel. Good vach, Michal David. I got to go to take a flight.